PowerPoint on biohacking your brain while boosting your immunity. So Dr. Heath, if you want to take over.
Hi there, guys. Are you able to hear me, Tia?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi there. I'm Dr. Tim Heath, and I'm from Optimized Wellness Center in the Bay Area. I went to Life West, so I remember those days of being at school while you all are now participating via some kind of electronic format. I still appreciate all of the efforts and time that you're spending to go through this process. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about biohacking your brain to try and boost your immunity. And these are just methods that connect chiropractic care with how to manage and improve your immunity. This is kind of timely in this era of COVID, and whether you're trying to avoid getting COVID and making sure that you can stay as healthy as possible and alleviate yourself from the risks associated with that, or if you have some kind of infirmity that you're trying to increase your immune system's capacity to be able to resolve that and improve your health. So I work as a functional medicine practitioner, and really in this context, what that means is I employ a variety of techniques to be able to help our patient base to be able to be the best that they can be. And we do that by optimizing the human function through maximizing your brain function, your detoxification pathways, mitigating aches and pains, addressing complex health conditions and autoimmune diseases, aligning the human performance with coordination. So this is about, cerebellar stuff and frontal lobes and so forth. Achieving healthy and sustainable weight. We know that that's so important, as well as enhancing your nutritional absorption. And then lastly, aging gracefully. So I was first connected with chiropractic at the age of 10, where I unfortunately broke my back falling down a few flights of concrete steel plated stairs. While I was young and I was a little bit more limber than I am now, still those were not very forgiving steps. Then fast forward a few decades and I was competing as a triathlete traveling around the country, and one of my training days I was hit by a car, and it really, life just hit me full on. And I had to figure out how I was going to resolve this. So I was dragged through a major intersection in a hit and run, and it was really quite traumatic. From there, I decided to transition and change careers and go back to school. But I hadn't had a science class since I was, in maybe junior high, poking frogs' eyeballs or something of that nature. So I recall how challenging it was. I went through those struggles. As a dyslexic, it was even more challenging, or it felt more challenging for me. Maybe there are other things that are more challenging. But I persevered and I put in the time. So I hope that you guys are doing the same things, and I applaud you for being here joining me today. I'm grateful that you're spending the time with me. This is terrific. So my mission is to be able to help people to collaborate with others and discover and uncover the best versions of themselves. And so we're going to talk about some of that today. And to that end, I want to empower you to be able to be compelled to embark on your own journey. And many of you are already taking those first steps. And so that's really terrific. I'm grateful that you're here doing that. So, again, we're going to talk about biohacking the brain, and many people have experienced things like brain fog or memory lapses or senior moments or disorientation. There are other things like type 2, but also type 3 diabetes. There are all kinds of things that could be coming down the pike, and none of them are good. So we want to try and figure out how to resolve these things or avoid them altogether, ideally. So that means putting in the efforts and the steps today so that we reap the rewards later. It's kind of like investing in an annuity or a stock or a bond. We have to realize that over a period of time. So that's what we're going to be working on. And hopefully these are some tips not only for you, but also ways that you can start thinking about how will you start communicating with your patients, okay? All right, guys. So so functional medicine is really, as I mentioned, about employing a variety of things. And, this is really talking about how to look at the underlying causes of your disease or your infirmity or ailment or your issue, whatever that might be, and then addressing them at the source. And so this requires more investigation, asking the why, and not merely just addressing the palliative pain or symptoms or other kinds of things like that, but diving deeper. So I know that Life West spends a lot of time really addressing those kinds of things, so I'm confident that you're in good hands. So the other things that are relevant are some of the hallmarks of functional medicine, and these hallmarks include being patient-centered. And so this means that you're really focusing on the individual and not so much about protocols, but that's also dealing with things like their internal measures of health as well as their external. So the contrast of body, mind, spirit by a contrast of the physical and the social and environmental kinds of factors. And we're going to look at some of those aspects today. And then integrating the best components of evidence-based science as well as all the other practices that you're learning about today. All right, so now moving into our talk today, we're going to look more at about how does this unfold for people. And this includes things like our diet and our lifestyle. So the SAD diet, maybe many of you are already probably familiar with that, but this really is one of the things that is challenging for so many people. And one of the reasons why I felt it was important to employ functional medicine is we can adjust until we are blue in the face and the patient is black and blue. But if their nutrition is crummy, they're just never going to be able to hold that adjustment particularly long. So we need to make sure that the body has all the integral components to be able to make sure that they can hold those adjustments going forward. Because just continuing to repeat those same adjustments time and time again, that doesn't seem like a full practice of resolution. Now, I know that you all just listened to a short video vignette on NET, and NET is also another great practice as a way to address the emotional components that may be involved in this as well. So we're going to talk about that in addition as we continue through this talk here today. So the healthy brain is going to give you 100% free function, and an unhealthy brain is really where there's going to be more brain-derived behaviors. And so we want to be able to move beyond these kinds of things. So there are 7 pillars that really talk about a healthy brain. And so these include many factors that you probably are already familiar with, things like physical exercise, your nutrition, health, medical health as well as your sleep capacity to be able to clean up and let the cleaners come in and sweep away the debris, and getting activities of relaxation as well as mental fitness. So this involves ways to try and exercise the muscles of our brain and being able to make sure that they are functioning properly. School is a great way to do that, but there are other techniques as well, and we're going to get into some of that also. Social interaction, challenging today, right? But we're able to do that through things like Zoom meetings and other kinds of things of this nature that can be helpful to facilitate that. You can still get out into nature, though. And so you can go for walks or hikes or runs or bike rides, you can go swimming, etc. All of those are potential things to be able to get at the social interaction or physical fitness, but you can do it at a distance. So we got to make sure in this current era that you have new means of being able to do that and practicing the appropriate things depending upon where you are and what are the current measures relevant to that. And then environment is so important. So, in this instance, we're talking about things like, who are we around? The people. Do they have a positive attitude? Or also, do I live an extremely healthy life, yet I live underneath a bridge or right next to a highway? Well, then all those things that I could be doing may be for naught because of the environment that we're in. So we're going to get into those things as well. So before we continue into those first steps there, I want to mention that there are a variety of factors that can really help or hinder our brain function. And this is things like inflammation due to genetics, which, we can't change that, but we can change all the expression of those genetics. Infections, poor nutrition, trauma. Also things like there are specialized cleaners of the brain. And maybe you guys have already started to learn about these things called the lymphatic system and glial cells in particular that are up in the brain. So this is like a specialized cleaning crew that goes upstairs to help with that. And then we have cerebral spinal fluid. And so this is the fluid that helps to bring nutrition to our nerve system, but also to clean out some of the waste products in addition. And so we need to be cognizant of how that's functioning also. There's things like autophagy. So this is where basically we have programmed cell death. And so we need to make sure that those cells do die at the time that they need to, and then we have appropriate cell turnover. So that can't happen too quickly because we may not have enough new cells to come in after them, but it also can't happen too slowly because then we get a backlog of deranged or damaged or dead cells that are around. Stress, of course, is an important factor for us to be aware of in managing that stress in our bodies. So we need to be cognizant of that. There's something called neuro and immunoexcitotoxicity. And so I don't know if you guys have gotten into this or not, but this is really kind of the forefront of the nerve research in how there's immune functions associated with that and how there can be excitotoxicity, meaning there is excitation of toxic activities within this framework. So this is really an important area for some of us who practice from a more neuro standpoint and really focusing deeply into that. And so we use that as well. Infections is another thing. Holy cow. So whether that's a COVID infection or all kinds of other infections, we need to be aware of what those are. And then brain nutrition. So we need to give the brain the right things for it to be able to thrive and do all those kinds of higher level activities that we want it to be able to do. People have concussions. Amazing. They knock their head, they get whiplash. And so we need to be able to recover from those kinds of things as well. So those are just some of the other things that can influence your healthy brain. And so we want to make sure that you're looking at those in addition. Okay, so let's go and start talking about each of these pillars here. So physical activity. Well, we know that physical activity helps to generate something called nitric oxide, and this helps your blood vessels to expand and dilate and become patent and open. And the blood is really like the nutrients that are coming through our body. It's carrying oxygen, but it's also carrying all those nutrients and the energy sources that we need to every organ, cell, and tissue. And then the nervous system is obviously what is stimulating those things and sending the signals bidirectionally. So we want physical activity to be able to help to pump that blood and get the nutrients and the oxygen throughout the body. And so we need to be able to utilize physical activity appropriately. And it's better, as I'm sure many of you know, to not get 2 hours of physical activity in one sitting, well, maybe it wouldn't be sitting, one setting, I should say, but rather to break it up over each day and ideally over throughout the day to consistently be in motion. So what's your best posture? Well, your best posture is your next posture, your next position. What the meaning of that is that you should be constantly moving so that you constantly have stimulus to the nerve system. So we're getting that feedback up to the brain, but also we're pumping all the nutrients that we need through our lymphatic system, but also through our vascular system. So physical activity can be, of course, things like aerobic activity, strength training, but also things like flexibility. So making sure that we can get full range of motion and not just limited movement patterns. And so that means we need to be consistently doing those things to be able to train that. Balance is so important. And so balance is through proprioception, which predominantly is through the cerebellum, the back part of the brain that stays ipsilateral in the body, but also we use our eyes to be able to create juxtaposition where we are in a framework. Also, we have mechanoreceptors, specialized nerve endings that are predominantly in the upper cervical, as well as in our ankles are the greatest concentration of those mechanoreceptors. And then we also have to be able to pick up that information through our environment and the otoliths in our ears. These are the little tubules, one going this way, one going that way, and one going this way. So it creates like a gyroscope kind of effect in the brain. All right, so then we need to talk about food and nutrition. So food and nutrition is so important. And this is a really important area of my practice where We know that there are a variety of studies that have been really important as it relates to what kinds of foods will generate the best outcomes long term. Of course, we all have cheat meals and we all want to, gravitate towards certain things on occasion, but we need to practice ideally the majority of the time eating certain foods that will foster proper neurologic activity, neurologic stability, but also our muscles, our joints, our bones as well. And so there were some really classic studies of brain fitness with nuns. And this was performed by Dr. Bob Goldman. And he looked at these nuns, and one group ate predominantly a plant-based whole food nutrition predominantly. And they really had almost no neurodegenerative activities like Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. By contrast of another group of nuns that was fed things like cheeses and meats and eggs and other kinds of dairy products, and they had statistically significantly greater amounts of those things. So this isn't to say that you can't eat meat by any stretch, but rather that predominantly we need to be feeding ourselves lots of whole nutrition, plant-based kinds of nutrition. So that can be really important. Sugar, as we know, spikes huge amounts of causal factors towards Alzheimer's and dementia. And Alzheimer's is really considered to be type 3 diabetes today. It's clinically recognized as this amongst the neurologic community. And so we know that neurodegeneration is fed by sugars. Also, things like, of course, cancers and diabetes are fed by sugars as well. So we need to really limit those things. In the sugars, anything ending with ose, lactose, glucose, galactose, fructose, maltose, any of those are all sugars. So we need to be cognizant of when we're putting those in our body and what volume and what we're doing to be able to slow the process of being able to utilize that appropriately in our body. Okay. So those are really important things. Mediterranean diet has classically been known to be one of the healthiest diets long-term. Of course, there are communities like blue zones that have been able to utilize this kind of a generalized diet that has been so healthy, and they tend to be centenarians, living very long lives, almost to 100, many of them as a community. So limiting meats and don't forgo your fish. This is so important for supporting the nutrition of your brain. Those omega-3s, predominantly those low or inflammatory omegas, are really helpful. And then load up your plate with lots of vegetables, and even some fruits can be really helpful. Don't forget, you can eat things like dark chocolate. You can spice up your life with lots of different kinds of flavors, can be really helpful. Grab a cup of coffee. Arguably, coffee has been known to be really helpful for brain function in helping to stimulate and activate that. So that can be another one that's really powerful. And then you can toast for a little bit of health as well. Resveratrol, coming from red grapes in particular, can be a healthy antioxidant. And then you can even eat things like eggs in moderation, because this helps provide things like vitamin B and D and E, and can be really helpful for protein generation as well. And you can take a variety of supplements to supplement what you get from your dinner plate. So bridging the gap where there may be gaps in that diet that you're consuming. And those can be things like vitamin C or vitamin E, DHEA from fish or other kinds of products can be really helpful. Let's transition now to talk about mental health. So when we talk about mental health, we need to consider how to modulate risk factors. And this would be risk factors from things like, sorry, we're talking about medical health. I apologize. I think I said mental health. So medical health, we need to control risk factors. So if we have specific known risks or current conditions, then we need to manage those. It is not our job to manage the medication. We are not intended to be doing that per our licensure, unless you have some other kind of additional license to be able to do that, or you work collaboratively with someone, then you can do those kinds of things. But we can try and improve the body's function so that we resist the requirements for medications, or even lowering the need for those medications as we enhance the body's capacity. So we can do this through managing things like blood pressure and our weight and having appropriate physical activity and providing the right kinds of nutrients in our body. So there are some risk factors like diabetes and obesity that are really challenging. And so we need to be able to avoid the white menace, that's sugar, white flour, and then hydrogenated fats, and even the bleached salts can be a factor there. Eating more fiber, getting appropriate amounts of protein 3 times a day is so important. Many people are really deficient in protein. Portion control. So we gotta eat appropriate for our age, our gender, our lifestyle, other factors that are going on in our life at that moment. And then getting appropriate physical activity. So then we have risk factors like hypertension. So we have high blood pressure factors. So that's also around mitigating it through things like modulating our salt. In particular, this is refined salts that we're talking about here. Keeping active, checking your blood pressure regularly, and then maintaining your healthy weight. And if you need to, taking the appropriate medications, especially if your BP is really high. I was seeing a patient just last week, her BP was over 210, which was really scary. And I had to inform her that I needed to make an immediate medical recommendation for her to go to the hospital. No patient likes hearing that, but that is the appropriate thing for us to be doing. We also need to talk about things like sleep and relaxation. So we're going to transition and talk about this, because this is when the cleaners come into the brain when we sleep, and they sweep away the cobwebs and allow for there to be time to organize things so that we can come back the next day fresh, ready to go. So just like being a student, if all your books are open to various pages, notes are fanned out everywhere, there's all kinds of food wrappers around, and there's other kinds of junk on top of that, and your laundry's there, it's just so disorganized, and it's very disorienting and very challenging to think critically, to think in an organized fashion, and to be able to move ahead with a plan and to take those steps forward. So when we sleep, those cleaners, those glial cells that we were talking about earlier, I touched on, as part of our lymphatic system, they come in and clean up and organize things. So in the absence of getting consistent, restful sleep, then that doesn't happen, and it will catch up with people. So we need to help people with appropriate sleep hygiene patterns and talking to them about getting consistent, measurable, really deep and healthy sleep to be able to do that. On the relaxation side of the fence, we need to talk about how to fight depression. So there is about 17 million individuals who are depressed in America, and this is really challenging for Americans. And so our lymphatic system, again, is super important, and it's part of the way that we clean up those things in our brain. But then we use the limbic system, which is a really deep central part of the brain, which is associated with our emotions. And this is around memories and arousal, and if there's altered function in our limbic system, then this can lead to depression, and the depression leads to negativity and a low libido. And so we need to find ways to create happiness. We get to create our own emotions, so we need to think happy thoughts and try and be around happy people and create happy activities and so forth. So staying positive is super critical. And managing stress is another thing that we need to do to be able to address this. So stress is given in our lives, and you will always have some stress in your life. There's negative components to stress, and then there's eustress, which is positive stress. Things like physical activity and exercise creates a positive stressor in the body. So the question is not whether you're going to have any stress, but so much, or rather, whether you're riding the waves or you're being beat up by those waves and tumbling through them. So you need to have your own strategies for managing stress and making a big difference.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Sounds like someone hasn't muted themselves yet. If someone hasn't, maybe we can catch up with you later. Thanks for joining us while you're on here. So the parasympathetic nerve system, as I'm sure many of you know, is a super important part of our autonomic nerve system. And using targeted vagal nerve stimulation and enhanced vagal tone, that's the vagus nerve that runs down bilaterally, the VAGUS vagus nerve. And there are lots of ways to stimulate the vagus nerve, whether that's through gargling or causing a gag reflex or diaphragmatic breathing patterns. All of these can be mechanisms of stimulating the vagus nerve and helping you modulate your stress response. Like, if anyone is still not muted, maybe you can take a moment and help with that, and we'll make sure to get back to you if you have a question.
Hey, Chelsea, can you please mute your mic?
Okay, so then there are some other things like practicing saying no, focusing on the present, keeping a list of the things that bother you and writing them down, and then scheduling some minutes to review those for yourself. Giving your brain a break, take a 10-minute brain break periodically, using some imagery techniques, as well as thinking positively, allowing events to just unfold naturally, not getting too caught up in them, and then focusing on specific problems at hand right now. Don't get too worried about the things in the future or in the past, but what are the things that are right now that you can work on? You can also use some other supplements to be able to help to manage stress and periods of stress, like L-theanine or St. John's wort, 5-HTP, or valerian, or all other things that might be able to help you out with that. Let's talk about mental fitness. So we're going to transition and talk about building your brain's reserves. And this is helping your brain to adapt in the response to changes and resisting the damages associated with that. So most of us are challenged with change. Certainly, coronavirus era has created a lot of changes for many of us, and we need to roll with this and figure out strategies to be able to move beyond this. So a baby's brain really is unmyelinated. There's no nerve sheath over those nerves, and so we need to create the right kinds of patterns and exercises for these babies' brains so that we can formulate the appropriate myelin sheaths around them. And that also requires some nutrients to be able to do that. And then as we become late teens and in our early 20s, that myelin begins to develop, as well as our prefrontal cortex. And then our judgment centers, our ability to be able to think critically, is really starting to peak in our mid-20s. And so we need to be able to foster those kinds of things. So losing cognitive flexibility is really to be detrimental. So we need to be open and flexible and agile, and to be able to think critically and to be flexible with those changes that are taking place. And this could be associated with low serotonin. So we need to be considering potentially we need to make sure that our gut is functioning properly, because that's where a lot of that serotonin is generated, okay? So again, supplements like 5-HTP, St. John's wort, and inositol all can help to facilitate that. So those are some tricks around that. And then considering things like play and going out and doing like word games or puzzles or chess or other kinds of sports, but then learning new things. And so doing like recall kinds of activities, or integrating the whole parts of our brain so we can formulate kinds of movement patterns or brain patterns to integrate how they are doing these kinds of things. So this is something that I integrate into my practice. Before I do any adjusting, I'm assessing where they are and how those things are functioning, looking to see if there are any hemisphericities or any deficits that we need to work on. So then we can think about things like the left side hears changes in frequency, or the right side has a lot of inputs associated with music and putting these pieces together. We talked about the limbic system they're associated with emotions and music. Also, increasing our prefrontal cortex can enhance our concentration. Stimulating the right temporal lobe is associated with religion and spiritual experiences. And so there's lots of things that we can do to try and enhance people's brain function. And so we just need to look at what those could be, and that's through a proper intake and consistently inquiring what's going on, and then integrating these from a holistic point of view. So let's talk about social interaction. So this next slide here is talking about social interaction. And so social interaction question. This is staying connected with people. And so, sorry, I don't have any notes in here, but I'm going to talk through this. So in this era, as you know, it's challenging to be able to meet up with people in person. So we can still be around people. We need to keep our social distance. And so that can be still wearing a mask and keeping the social distance in the appropriate environments that may be required to be able to do that. But we can still interact through things like Zoom, giving people a call. So I want each of you to take a moment right now. Think about one friend, just one, that you haven't been able to connect with recently, and who you are thinking about and wanting the best for, and you cherish them in your life. And I want you to write down that name. And when we get off here today, just reach out to them. Give them a call, send them a message, get them a little text message or some other way. Maybe set up a Zoom meeting with them and just connect for a moment. Those kinds of connections are so valuable and can be really important for people to make sure that they boost their body's capacity. Treasuring their loved ones, meeting up with your dogs or pets and staying connected with them can be really important. So the last thing I want to talk about, guys, I know we're running short on time here, is environment. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to connect with Dr. Bruce Lipton. He is an amazing, amazing man. I remember he taught at Life West previously, and maybe he still is doing some courses. But he wrote a variety of books. One of them was called The Biology of Belief, And one of the things that he spends a lot of time talking about is how there's a psychosomatic activities that we often think about where your body and physical issues are affecting your mental ones. But then there's also the somatic psychic phenomena. And so that's the reverse of this. And this environmental association here that we're talking about is where we describe the body-mind medicine. And so this is the opposite of that, where mental symptoms can affect our body's illnesses. So this is one of the ways where NET is so important. And so I'm really grateful that we had that introductory video earlier before I came on today. But this is also a time where we need to think about things like, is the patient that you're working with or yourself dealing with mercury poisoning, or is there a thyroid problem, or could they have abnormal gut flora? Could there be a deficiency of vitamin D, like 50% of Americans, or vitamin B12? And all of these are very hard to have proper brain function if any of those are going on. So I mentioned earlier that even if you're trying to do all the right things in your life, but you're around negative individuals or you live under a bridge, it may unravel all those things. So we need to be integrative in how we think about that in the environment we put ourselves in on a daily basis. That could also be cherishing your home and making your home a sanctuary where you can really thrive and feel relaxed and make sure that you have all the things that you need to live the best life that you have. So guys, I know we went through a lot of things here, these environmental stressors, dietary and food things, mental, mind, emotional stressors, as well as leaky gut and intestinal permeability. These are all really important, and so we need to consider those when you're talking with your patients. So some things to consider associated with that could be, are you getting proper amounts of your omega-3s, 6, and 9s in your body? Are you taking appropriate nutrients? Are you doing activities to stimulate your brain and create the right connections there? Are you getting physical activity as well? All these are so important. And so I'm so grateful that we had a chance to talk about this today. If there are any questions, I want to make sure to try to address those. So maybe, Tia, I don't know if there were any that you've seen come across the line that I can help to address. I'm happy to do that in the remaining minutes we have here. So while you guys, if anyone is typing in a question here, just in summary, some of the things we shared today were advocating utilizing a Mediterranean or some version of a Mediterranean diet, reducing the inflammation in your body through mitigating stressors, as well as getting physical activity, and getting regular and consistent exercises, not only for the purposes of increasing muscle function, but also how that sends information up to the brain. Drinking heaps and heaps of clean, crystal clean water is really important. practicing appropriate sleep hygiene, and then reducing your stressors. Okay, so I see a question here. How do you have, oops, it just went off the screen. Shoot, where did that go?
The question is,
Can you read the question to me?
Yeah. How do you have the hard conversations with the patient that just doesn't get it?
Yeah, that's a super important one. And, you know, the reality is we need to meet the patient where they're at, and we need to start small, because those small things can have, as we know, the ripple effect, right? And so we know the drop, you know, the little stone that goes in there, one droplet going in the water, and can have a ripple effect. So we need to meet them and not overwhelm them, but start small and encourage them through that process. And that's another way of making sure that you have consistent opportunities to be able to encourage them, whether that's while they're in your office and while you're working with them, or through messaging them and consistently sending out information that may be appropriate and encouraging them through that process. So, you know, it's also our responsibility to be observant. And so when we see things that may be beyond just the aches and pains or the issues that they have specifically come in for, and say, hey, Mrs. Smith, you know, I noticed this other thing here. I noticed that when you walk, one of your arms is not moving and the other one is. Or I noticed that when you talk, initially it takes a moment for you to get the words starting to come out of your mouth. Or I noticed when you create movement patterns that there's a little bit of jerkiness at the final steps. It's our job to be aware of those things and to bring them up and address those. That was a great question. It is challenging though, and it takes constant effort of working with people in a really passionate way. Any other questions that I can help with?
Dr. Tim, I wanted to say thank you so very much for coming out and having a conversation with us today.
Yeah.
Could you impart some of your tactics on how to survive chiropractic school? Because it's not always that you can get the sleep and the nutrition and the creative culture outside of here.
Oh my gosh. All right. Yes, I will try to really quickly summarize this. It's tough. I went back to school in my 40s. I'm dyslexic. It had been a minute since I'd been in school. It was a challenge, but one that I was willing to take. So, all right, first things first. When you're in class, this is your time to pay attention. You know, put down your phone, stop doodling about, and take the notes, because if you do it then, you won't have to do much outside of that. Secondly, associate with the smartest people in your class. Find them and be friends with them. And then schedule every day, schedule just 10 or 15 minutes right after the class or right after school to just quickly review the notes. It's amazing how repetition really creates patterning in the brain, and then you will easily get through that material. But associating with the smartest people will help you to be able to get through that. Then scheduling a time with that smartest person where you will take on the subject that is hardest for yourself, and you will learn it to the degree that you will teach it to that partner of yours, and then have them choose what is hardest for them to grapple with, so that they get it enough that they will teach you. Because when you have to teach something, you have to own the material. You can't just be kind of, you know, bobbling about. It's just not going to work. So that's a strategy to get through that. Another strategy is taking time walking and doing physical activity while reviewing notes. There's something really awesome about how physical activity embeds knowledge in the brain in a really impactful way. So one of the strategies I employed was I wrote down 5x8 note cards, and I would just get high-level stuff. And I would walk around the campus on my breaks or at lunch. And the point is not to memorize it. The point is not to like drive home the stuff. Just keep repeating the information. Just read it out loud. 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 Don't worry about the nuances of it. But the repetition creates embedding of that knowledge, and that's super important thing. Lastly, I know that at least when I was there, they had a lot of the quizzes and tests, old ones, in the library. This is amazing, guys. You can go and practice from this material, and you start to learn how to work through those kinds of questions and start to get some idea, oh, this is what's intended here. This is what's important, or how do I struggle through that kind of thing. And then you have super duper smart instructors, and they have available time for you. Schedule meetings with them. you will be amazed at how powerful that can be, trying to build those relationships, asking those questions, and getting that information, because those opportunities are much harder when you graduate. So take advantage of those when you can. And lastly, there are lots of seminars that are available to you as a student. And I would encourage you to sign up for everything you can initially, and then start to whittle away what's really valuable and important and impactful for you. And then start to, just don't repeat the ones that are not as valuable to you. But then the ones that are, take them a second time. They're very inexpensive as a student or free, and take them a second time. They're really expensive as a doctor, and they are challenging to get the time to be able to do it. So I implore you to do that. Those are some of my techniques. Hopefully that's helpful.
Very. Thank you for sharing. Do you do the functional medicine blood work or other testing directly in your office?
Yeah, we do all kinds of work, whether it's blood, sputum, stool, urine, breath. I don't know, did I miss any? I'm not sure. We do all of those depending upon what we're looking for, but we use our clinical knowledge first. So we do an intake and we review things and we get an idea. Then we use a variety of like objective questionnaires that will give us greater certainty that that's the path we want to go down. And then if we need further affirmation, then we'll use one of these evidence-based, really high-level testing to be really accurate, because in the absence of testing, you're guessing. So much like we do muscle testing and other kinds of testing for subluxations, we can use this kind of testing to discern, do they have SIBO, or do they have a thyroid condition? Is it hyper or hypo, or do they have neurodegeneration like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that? Or is there mercury through the body? So we want to know those things. And just because you have a headache, yes, I know that it could be related to stage 4 cancer, but normally headaches are just related to dehydration or a stressful day or various other stuff. So we need to be critical in the way that we go through this process and not just jump the gun and assume things. And so we want to use that kind of specialized testing for that. Great question. So as doctors, we are considered primary care doctors. We have access to all that testing, and we're available to do that. Granted, I can't draw blood, but we can send people to Quest or other places like that very easily. Yeah.
Have you had conversations with patients who have some type of diet restrictions when discussing food and nutrition? Do you have to outsource?
Yeah, so that depends upon your comfort zone and your familiarity with that. You can certainly use other people that you create relationships with, and that's an important thing to do, to make sure you have a network of other providers that you're willing to refer to and associate with and collaborate with. Sometimes you can have those individuals in office. I have historically, but I also have chosen to take a lot of time to learn about nutrition and diet. So when people have dietary restrictions, then we need to be creative and figure out ways to work around that. So sometimes that can be some of our own personal homework before we go back and start talking with that patient and sharing, hey, okay, given the fact that you have, celiac disease, and we need to figure out other ways that you're going to be able to do right? Or talking to them about making sure all the things that might provoke their celiac response is an example. So those are really important things, and we need to make sure those are really apparent in our notes with that patient so that we don't overlook them, because a patient will immediately discount you if you start saying things that are contrary to their current condition or their restrictions. So that's really an important thing to do. Yeah.
Fantastic.